All right, today we're in 2 Corinthians chapter 8. So we want to be walking by the Spirit. Why? Because we're in phase 2 of our sanctification. This is where the majority of the epistles deal with this phase of our salvation, not how to get saved, but once we're saved, how are we to be sanctified? It's called experiential righteousness. So this is where we are progressively conformed to the image of Christ by His grace as we walk in the Spirit. And this is where the power of sin is broken. So we always talk about that acronym FROGS, and I won't go back over that today. You can move backward in the teaching in Corinthians and see what that acronym stands for. Quiz from chapter 7. True or false? Paul points out that his ministry, unlike the false teachers, wronged no one, corrupted no one, and took advantage of no one. These are really 3 good values to look for in pastors today. That's true. Oops, that's true. Paul did not condemn the saints. He did, however, bring correction to the saints. He didn't beat the sheep, but he encouraged them and boasted about them. That's true. That's another good thing to look for in a pastor. He's not constantly raining down judgment on the congregation. He is teaching them and encouraging them. Paul was a tremendous encourager. He pointed out what the congregation needed, but it wasn't in any form of condemnation. It was in form of correction, letting the Scripture teach the people and encouraging them to step up in their sanctification. Paul was depressed. He had Dr. Luke, who traveled with him quite a bit, prescribed some heavy-duty antidepressants, began using various CBD products and essential oils to overcome it. He knew God was the God of all comforts, but he needed to deal with this on his own. That's absolutely false. Paul, of anybody, knew that God was the God of all comforts. Paul was depressed for a very short time, and he took action to try and get hooked up with Titus, who he knew had a report about the Corinthians' response to the severe letter. And sure enough, God moved and Paul moved, and God, the God of all comforts, brought the great news that the Corinthians had responded properly. So Paul just didn't wallow in it or try and do something to cover up the depression. True or false? A person must be really, really, really sorry for their sins, which is called godly sorrow, if they have a snowball's chance in hell of God seeing how sorry they are and accepting their works of repentance as the basis to save them. This is really false. This is a terrible, terrible way of presenting the gospel to anybody. It's a gospel of works. The gospel of works doesn't save anybody. Anytime you present a gospel that is not 100% Jesus did it all, it is finished, is what Jesus said. He paid it all. And what your job is to do is to believe. It is 0% you and 100% Him. And so you must trust in Jesus, not in anything that you could possibly do to save yourself. The Corinthians had responded with godly sorrow. Here's your godly sorrow, leading to repentance. Again, this is a change of mind as part of their sanctification, not justification. And they had exercised church discipline against the man who had spoken so offensively to Paul in front of the whole church. And Paul found this out from the report by Titus and was overjoyed at the response. This is a demonstration of spiritual maturity as they walked in the Spirit, and that's true. That's the proper interpretation and application of the verse in 2 Corinthians chapter 7. Big picture, 2 Corinthians. Again, Corinthians need to obey the epistles, or church discipline follows, and this is a perfect example of that. Chapters 8 and 9. Finally, we're going to move on to something a little bit different. This is going back to Paul's ongoing effort to collect money for the poor saints in Jerusalem. He would be doing this for a period of about 5 years, from 52 to 57 AD, on his missionary journeys, which were out into the Gentile world. And he solicited funds from the Christians in Galatia, Macedonia, Achaia, which is Corinth, and Asia Minor. And what would happen is he would get delegates from most of these regions who would accompany him when he took the money to Jerusalem. So he had a very good way of handling money so that people would not have any questions about how that was done. Paul loved his Jewish brethren who had become believers at a great cost in Jerusalem. He knew this because he had persecuted a lot of them. And since his conversion, he believed supporting them honored Christ. He believed equalizing God's provision within the church as needs arose was a good work for Christian churches to do. And for Gentiles especially, it was an illustration of the spiritual indebtedness that Gentiles owe their Jewish brethren. And by the way, just when we're talking about money here, in chapters 8 and 9, the epistles, when they deal with Christian giving, never used the word tithing. Tithing was the national tax under the law on every person in Israel. The church is not a nation, is not Israel, has no such law and no such tax. So some pastors will say, okay, we grant you that the church is not Israel. And so they go back all the way to Abraham and they say, now remember, Abraham gave a tithe to Melchizedek as a standard for giving. So see, we can go all the way back to Abraham. Abraham was a good guy, right? So if Abraham gave a tenth, no, that's not a good pattern either. Abraham, first of all, was a Gentile, wasn't a Christian. Abraham did this one time. It was from the spoils of war, and it was given to this mysterious king priest named Melchizedek. That is hardly guidance to Christians as a pattern for giving. So churches that teach tithing to Christians are either confusing Israel and the church, and that's not a good church to be in, because you're going to be in a church that is going to tend to be very legalistic, and especially about giving, which in a proper church which distinguishes the church and Israel, giving is always grace giving. It is not legal giving, which tithing is legalistic giving. So something good to keep in mind there. So watch how it works here. This is about a collection being taken up for the saints. So it's not your standard giving. I'll point out the two passages in the epistles that deal with giving here under applications later on. 2 Corinthians 8, now, brethren, we wish to make known to you the grace of God, which has been given to the churches of Macedonia, that in a great ordeal of affliction, their abundance of joy and their deep poverty overflowed in the wealth of their liberality. Interesting word. Liberality, according to the Greek lexicons, means personal integrity demonstrated by action. And I would never have guessed that definition looking just at the word in English. And this is where the use of lexicons can be really helpful in proper interpretation. So this is, they had made a promise. They're living up to the integrity of what they had promised by this action that they are taking. So I just wouldn't have guessed that that's what that word meant. Verse 3, for I testify that according to their ability, and even beyond their ability, they gave of their own accord, begging us with much urging for the favor of participation in the supporting of the saints. And this not as we had expected, but they first gave themselves to the Lord and to us by the will of God. So in this first few sentences, Paul is talking about the churches to the north of Corinth. These would have been Philippi, Thessalonica, Berea. These were the churches who had received the grace of God in the first tense of salvation, justification, and now they were exhibiting the grace of God in the second tense of salvation, which is sanctification. They were suffering, and they were poor, but when Paul had talked to them about the suffering of the Jewish Christians in Jerusalem, they begged him for the opportunity to send them some relief with whatever little money they had. And Paul didn't have to twist their arms. He didn't have to show them pictures of suffering saints and so forth. He didn't have to tell them what it was like to be hungry. They knew exactly what that was like. And they were not responding naturally or philanthropically. They responded supernaturally by grace, even from their own poverty, according to their own will. Paul didn't expect them to be so gracious because they were suffering so much. And they were not looking for tax breaks or Paul's praise. They could relate to fellow Christians and by the grace of God desired to help. This really isn't a natural desire arising from the sin nature, but a godly desire arising from the walk in the Spirit. So that's why Paul was just kind of overwhelmed by their grace giving to the saints in Jerusalem. So verse 6, we urge Titus, as he had previously made a beginning, so he would also complete you in this gracious work as well. So Paul, Titus had volunteered to go back, and so Paul says, okay, Titus, go on back to Corinth to continue the collections. They too had expressed the same godly desire to participate. Paul had explained to them how to do this in 1 Corinthians 16, the first couple of verses there. You take up the money, once a week and you put it away, so that when the assigned guys come to pick it up, you have the money on hand. You're not trying to, dig around for it at the last minute. Just as he had taught these other churches in Galatia and in Macedonia. The Corinthian church was not poor. In fact, they were probably the most spiritually gifted church of any church, and materially they were not poor at all. Seems this commitment had been made, had become something they had forgotten about due to all the turmoil that they had been through here in the last year. So Paul is tactfully reminding them, and he sends Titus back there to take up their collections. Verse 7, but just as you abound in everything, in faith, utterance, and knowledge, these were spiritual gifts that they had in those days, in all earnestness and in the love we inspired in you, see that you abound in this gracious work also. So they had all these great spiritual gifts. He wanted them to demonstrate this grace gift of giving as well. So Paul's an encourager and just continually boasts about this church. He's not beating them up. You've got to give, and you've got to give till it hurts. The saints need encouragement even more today as we near the end of the church age. It's a good thing for the local church to recognize that Christianity exists beyond their four walls, and there are local churches in need. Someday they may have a need, and that same local church might be of help to them. So we see things like this today when one church helps out another, when natural disasters hit an area. Collections are taken up or supplies are sent to help them out. And sometimes men and women who can work with their hands go to the site and they help feed and rebuild the other local church. Texas and Louisiana are good examples, seem to be hit a lot recently with natural disasters, hurricanes and flooding and so forth. So there's lots of opportunity for grace giving between these kinds of churches. Verse 8, I'm not speaking this as a command, but as proving through the earnestness of others, the sincerity of your love also. So Paul gave the example of grace giving in the Macedonian churches. He uses the word proving, which means testing. And by context, it is a test God has given them to demonstrate grace giving. God tests us with opportunities to grow us and to mature us and to conform us to the image of Christ. Paul says this is one of those tests. It's an opportunity. He could have made a command. He had the authority to do that. He could have shamed them. He could have pressured them, but he did none of those things. Forcing monies out of believers proves nothing about them, but it would have made him look like a bully and more like a false teacher. If you've ever been under one of the preachers that is like that, you quickly see the difference between Paul and one of those kinds of preachers. Paul simply appealed to them and gave them examples. Just as a point of doctrine, God does test us, but he never tempts us. God tests us for the purpose of approving us and maturing us. God does not tempt us. Temptations come from our flesh, our sin nature, or from Satan. It is for the purpose of disapproving us and destroying us. That's what temptation does. The book of James, the book on practical righteousness for believers, it was actually written to Hebrew Christians. Once the law of Moses went away, the Hebrew Christians are struggling with, how are we supposed to live righteously? And that's what the book of James, the little book of James does, is it gives them the concepts of how to live a righteous life. Now that the law of Moses is gone, we're now living in the law of Christ. And the little book of James gives these some guidance on that. So, and it clarifies the doctrines of testing and tempting for believers. Verse 9, for you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you through his poverty might become rich. Sometimes pastors use this verse to beat the sheep into giving, more likely tithing or some other fundraising program they have come up with, building more and bigger buildings, relocating to a better location, installing state-of-the-art audiovisual and so forth. Or often times these kinds of projects pop up. Sometimes it involves providing the pastor more evangelistic outreach by means of private jets or jet. They are so important, these pastors, that you must give more money so God's word can reach all over the world through them, because they are God's anointed ones. These are false teachers. They're wolves in sheep's clothing, men who use ministry to enrich themselves, who are self-deceived. They will say Jesus gave everything for you, and you aren't really giving until it really hurts like Jesus hurt. You should be ashamed of the little amount you give. It is true we cannot outgive God, but we're not called to outgive God. How could we? He's God. We're mere men. Leave a church that does that to people. In this verse, we see the doctrine of the incarnation. It's called the hypostatic union. Jesus never gave up being God, and therefore he continued to have all of the riches of the Godhead. But at the same time, he added humanity to his deity. In his humanity, he shares all the things with us except a sin nature. And this is something we are unable to fully comprehend. He is undiminished deity, united with true humanity, without mixture or separation in one person. Just let that one work on your mind for a few minutes, and you'll see how it's just, I mean, we can read it and we can think about it, but to truly fully comprehend that is the mind of God, and I'm not sure we'll ever get there on that one. Verse 10, I give my opinion in this matter, for this is to your advantage, who were the first to begin a year ago, not only to do this, so they had committed to this contribution to the poor Christian Jewish people in Jerusalem a year ago. Not only to do this, but also to desire to do this. So it had taken 5 years for the Corinthians to mature enough to get interested in helping others in Jerusalem. 1 Corinthians 16, chapter 16 was written 5 years after Paul started that church, and they were just then becoming spiritually mature. Paul uses tact with them at this point. Tact is the ability to make an argument without making an enemy. Verse 11, but now finish doing it also, so that just as there was the readiness to desire to do it, so there may also be the completion of it by your ability. So you said you would do it. Now let's finish it up with the action. For if the readiness is present, it is acceptable according to what a person has, not according to what he does not have. So Paul is just reminding them gently of what they committed to do. One of the principles of Christian giving is not for a person to put himself into debt to give to other Christians. If you have the means, by all means, carry out your promise. If you don't put yourself into debt to help somebody else who is in debt. This is really a matter of conscience. Situations do change where you intended to give a certain amount, but jobs are lost or jobs are gained, and as finances change, giving can and should be adjusted. Chapter 9 will deal with some of the guiding principles in the Christian's conscience which guide him in his giving. Verse 13, for this is not for the ease of others, but for your affliction, but by way of equality. At this present time, your abundance being a supply for their need, so that their abundance also may become a supply for your need, that there may be equality. As it is written, he who gathered much did not have too much, and he who gathered little had no lack. So equality here is not saying that the church should go to socialism rather than capitalism as its economic model. All giving in the church is voluntary, always. What Paul is saying here is that the saints in Jerusalem are really hurting with no other help available than from fellow Christians. The Corinthians had the opportunity and the means to voluntarily help them until such a time as they were in a better situation. Remember, the Jerusalem saints were in an area where a famine was occurring throughout the whole area of Judea, by the way. The Jews had cut them off from their basic economy, and the Romans didn't have any welfare programs for non-citizens, non-Romans. So there was a grace opportunity for Corinthian Christians to help the Jewish Christians. It's possible that the situation may be reversed in the future, and the Corinthians may be in need. So each local church should be an independent entity. It does not give to a hierarchical structure who then distributes the funds as it sees fit. So this is not socialism where the government forcibly takes assets from one group and redistributes them from them and gives them to those who don't have them in the name of fairness or equality of outcomes, regardless of whether the ones with the assets agree or not. This is a system opposed to biblical Christianity. Socialism is opposed to biblical capitalism. Verse 16, so here's how the money should be protected when giving to another church so that everybody knows how it's going to be handled. Verse 16, thanks be to God who puts the same earnestness on your behalf in the heart of Titus. For he not only accepted our appeal, but being himself very earnest, he has gone to you out of his own accord. We have sent along with him the brother whose fame in the things of the gospel has spread throughout all the churches. I wish we knew the name of this guy, but we're never told. And not only this, but he has also been appointed by the churches to travel with us in this gracious work. So this guy was well known. The other churches have appointed him to do this, which is being administered by us for the glory of the Lord himself and to show our readiness, taking precautions so that no one will discredit us in our administration of this generous gift. So, for we regard for what is honorable, not only in the sight of the Lord, but also in the sight of men. So Paul's taking extra precautions to make sure that this money is handled properly. So Titus is somebody the Corinthians know very well. They've learned to trust him. He has been a sound teacher, has lived righteously among them. Along with Titus comes another brother who's well known in the churches of Macedonia as a preacher of the gospel and a trustworthy man. Don't know his name. The other churches appointed him to safely deliver their gifts to Jerusalem, and Paul also trusts him. So now we have two trustworthy men. Verse 22, we have sent with them our brother, whom we have often tested and found diligent in many things, but now even more diligent because of his great confidence. So additionally, Paul sends a third brother who is quite confident in, and he has been tested and found diligent in his work. So now we have three trustworthy men who will handle the money. As for Titus, he's my partner, fellow worker among you, and as for our brethren, they are messengers of the churches, a glory to Christ. Therefore, openly before the churches, show them the proof of your love, that would be this contribution, and of our reason for boasting about you. So Paul's laid out a very sure way to handle the money, which should give the churches involved every confidence that what they have given their money for will be safely delivered for its intended purpose. It was likely not a large amount of money, but still it's a temptation to be misappropriated. Paul wanted no stain on the ministry, nor any hint of misuse of funds. Handling of money is problematic today, especially in these very large churches or mega churches. Large amounts of money are coming into these churches weekly. Huge buildings, large staffs, little transparency of the actual detail of income and expenses is problematic. Some churches leave this to a deacon board or an elder board. They update the church annually with a top-line budget review. Staff salaries are generally off limits entirely for everyone. The full benefit packages for top staff are generally not revealed. Generally, if a person asks for detail, they're given a very curt response. These churches sometimes hide behind audits conducted every so often by evangelical audit firms to validate that they are within the guidelines of other churches of this size. So you really get no information about the detail of how your money, the money that you're contributing, generally, they're forcing you to tithe, how that tithe is being used. So that's up to you. But we'll be talking about a couple of passages here now in the applications about how your money is to be used. We don't have that same situation with the Jews. Here's our applications, the Jewish Christians in Jerusalem. That was during the time of Paul. But we still have some principles to apply. Christian giving is always voluntary. It's an act of grace flowing out of your experiential sanctification. There are only two passages in the epistles that give guidance to Christian giving. One is Romans 15:27. This is Gentile saints supporting Jewish saints because we have partaken of the spiritual things of theirs. We should support them in material things when there is a need. Just like that's our example, the Jerusalem saints. And 1 Timothy 5:17 and 18. The elder who works hard at preaching and teaching should be given double honor, referring to support. This 1 Timothy passage is very neglected as Christians attend churches who teach poor or false doctrine, and yet they give their money or tithe to that church. How Christians used the financial resources God provided them will certainly be part of the Bema Seat judgment. Now, you can use your money however you want to use it, and you can send your money off to whatever you want to send it to. But these are the two guiding passages that we have in the epistles that teach Christians what to do with their money. Christian churches who share the same doctrine may decide to support each other in time of need, such as when natural disasters hit. Sending them money, supplies, and manpower to help in recovery should be a good work of experiential sanctification. That church could then provide support to the sister church in its time of need, should that time come and they are willing. Grace giving always means we do not place ourselves in debt in order to give. Managing our finances wisely is good stewardship of what God has given us, and when we are not in debt, we can give graciously as needs rise. So that's it for chapter 8. Next week, chapter 9. A little bit more on giving. Real short chapter, but we'll get some principles by which we can focus our giving to the two passages that I've mentioned up here, Romans 15:27 and 1 Timothy 5:17 and 18. God bless you as you walk in the Spirit this week. Grace and peace be with you.